Yes. Hello, and welcome to the VISGRAF webinar. Today we have a special guest, a friend and collaborator, Ken Perlin. And Ken is going to talk about his experience at Siggraph this year, especially his VR experience. And I'm very curious to know what Ken's perspective about Siggraph this year, as we discussed in the last seminar. So Ken, welcome, and you can start when you are ready for your presentation. Just let me know.
Okay, thanks, Luis. So I'm going to be talking from the perspective of our lab, Future Reality Lab. And I'm going to start out by giving some history of what our lab does and what our past projects are and how that leads to our current work, which is what we showed at Siggraph. So our lab's mission is very simple. We just want to understand what extended reality, or what some call blended reality, will be like when it's simply reality, when being there in person, being there virtually, all kind of tie together. So why not have virtual objects just in our world, and why not have our world be able to be in a virtual world? A lot of us were very influenced by this novel from 2006 by Werner Vinge called Rainbow's End. The idea of this award-winning novel was that people would wake up in the morning about 30 years in the future, pop in their contact lenses, and then they could see whatever they wanted. They didn't think about it. It wasn't about the technology. It was beyond the technology. Technology was simply an aspect of everyday reality. So I would say about 5 years after I read that, as soon as the Microsoft Kinect came out, I started doing experiments and some public lectures. This was a lecture I did at Siggraph Asia in 2011, in which basically people would see the video behind me, and whatever I did, it would look like I was drawing in the air, as though it was some future where we could all see that. And then we've spent the last almost a decade sort of filling in that vision by trying to really implement this. We had a big breakthrough in 2014 when the first Gear VR came out. I tried the Gear VR, which is basically a 3 degree of freedom, just rotational VR that worked with a Samsung Galaxy Note 4 phone. And as soon as I saw that, I went right out with a colleague, my colleague Luc Dubois, and at NYU, and we purchased a OptiTrack motion capture stage because we could put tracker markers on these things, and that would allow multiple people walking around in the same physical room to be able to see each other as avatars, as though they are all in a virtual world. And this was the wedge in the door, you could say, that allowed us to do very reasonable quality shared VR, which is completely embodied. People, if any of those people look at the other, they see them in their correct location as an avatar. And then we did many projects following this paradigm. Hologem in Wonderland was a theater project where everybody was in the same room, but both the performers and the audience saw each other as avatars. Flock was an experience where everybody was a bird in a magical flock of birds. Day of the Dead celebration that was inspired by ideas from some of the Mexican students in our lab, which was a reenactment of the celebratory nature of November 1st. And then the first thing we did was something at Siggraph 2015, where we just put a bunch of people in a room together, being able to draw in the air and create 3D drawings as a collaborative sculpture. The artist for most of these projects was David Lobser, who is a wonderful independent artist programmer. Here you can see what it looked like to people in the world, and below that, what was actually happening in our 2015 Siggraph experience. unlike many of the 3D drawing tools in VR you see now, this was meant from the ground up to be a collaborative social experience, as everything we do is. Here is a moment from our Day of the Dead celebration. People see each other in this sort of fabulous magical world as spirits in a big parade, but actually they're all in a motion capture room. Then by 2017, we were getting used to showing, say, up to 2 shows a year at Siggraph, which were always immersive and always embodied. And here is a sense, you get a sense of what was really going on in the real world in Flock, although what people actually saw was sort of this magical world where they saw each other as magical creatures as they walked around in the space. And this is Holodoodle, where people saw each other as dancing robots, but we use Tango phones here to be able to look into the experience so we can see the creatures that they were seeing as each other superimposed. A lot of people at Siggraph just kept lining up to go to this and go to a dance party and get away from the craziness of the conference. Then we asked ourselves the question, how does all of this scale up to hundreds of millions of people? Well, the way you scale up is by taking some of the ideas from theater, where everybody can be in their own physical location in a room and see and hear the performance from a unique location, with some of the ideas from cinema, where you can have a pre-recorded performance. So at Siggraph 2018, we did a piece called Cave, which some of you may have seen if you'd gone to Siggraph. It was seen by 2,000 people over the course of 3 days at the conference, 30 people at a time. Each person sees the other people as avatars in the fictional world of a virtual theater piece, which feels like live theater. This was our first attempt to really, really scale up. We showed it again at the Tribeca Film Festival to another 2,000 people the following year. And here you get a sense of it. There is the virtual character walking through, and people see each other as avatars in a cave, but in fact, they're sitting in chairs next to each other. This also had the benefit of starting to use inside-out tracked 6 Degree of Freedom headsets. So we no longer at this point needed any tracking equipment. Everything was completely self-sufficient. In fact, when we did this at the Tribeca Film Festival, the docents were just teenagers or older persons who just had iPads who would usher people in, and the technology simply worked on its own. We formed a spin-off company called Paralux, which is actually in the business of being able to scale up these things so they can be operated without sophisticated operators. People don't need to be programmers to operate these things. Then we decided to get more ambitious again in 2019, and we did a 5-character, 20-minute piece that was based on the origin story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And this one was designed to be seen both in full scale in VR, this time using Oculus Quests, and also it could be seen in miniature on a table as optical see-through AR using the Magic Leap. So, and here you're seeing, this is what just shot through the lens of the Magic Leap in our lab. And this one is far more developed story, characters, immersion, scene changes, lighting, and people who've experienced this in VR said they really got a sense that they had seen a full theater piece, except that the magic of the special effects could be like the magical special effects that you can only achieve in cinema. And even beyond that, they can be all around you as opposed to simply being on a screen. So in some sense, you're getting benefits of both cinema and theater and I think what one could think of as a really new art form. So we decided for Siggraph 2020 originally to do a hangout space for people who were physically going to go to Siggraph. And we thought we would make it, you could escape from the craziness of the conference by going into a robot bar, and you're on an alien planet and you're hanging out, you're having a drink with people, and we would actually provide real drinks for people and they would be co-located. And we started with a whiteboard sketch. And this was an idea of like, this was the first thing we did, was we do a robot holding a mixed drink. And we said, okay, can we match this idea of you hanging out with real people, but they feel like robots? we called it the Outpost because you're an outpost, you're crash landed on an alien planet. And we decided we would be influenced by sort of an optimistic sci-fi future. And so we looked at late 50s, early 60s science fiction art for visual inspirations, early 60s fashion, which was very positive and future looking. And the idea is that after traveling through the deep void of space, you land on an alien beach. So we looked at lots and lots of art of beaches, both real and virtual, and we tried to integrate them. We also looked at every artifact we could from that optimistic era of the late 50s to early 60s. What did spaceships look like? What did little toy trees look like for people who played with little toy dinosaurs? Maybe we could integrate those. These are all from the Marx Plastics Company. We looked at optimistic visions of robots as friendly characters from everything from the 1940s all the way through to some of the more friendly Star Wars characters. And then that all informed our avatar design. And we ended up with after many iterations, we ended up with the people who are the participants are avatars. Now, one of the things we had to deal with during the course of production was when we started, this was all about a co-located experience. Everybody realized by the end of March that this was not going to be a co-located experience. And so we'd had some dark and dystopian elements in the original, but by the time we realized that the entire conference needed to be online and people were going to be joining using their own headsets from home, we decided to make a completely optimistic and upbeat experience because that's really what people need in times like this. So interestingly, going behind the scenes about how our production was done, all of our 3D world design was done in virtual reality itself. So we could see what the world was looking like as we were creating it. We used standard tools for many things, such as Gravity Sketch and Blender, but then everything kept getting pulled into VR. The music was, there was actually a Brazilian element to the music because we were strongly influenced by Bossa Nova, since that was the optimistic music of the late 50s, early 60s of this era. But then we mixed in science fiction themes. We put in a theremin, which gave you some of the sense of, the slightly otherworldly science fiction music. The soundscape was very important because you need to feel as though you're not in your own room at home. You need the sense of larger reverb of being in a physically bigger space. And so we had to design a sound space which mixed some ideas from a real tropical landscape with sounds that you might hear from an alien forest. Originally, we could do everything in person. This is what our lab looks like in real life in Manhattan. And so people could just share the experience and see each other. They could figure out what it was like to share a physical drink while they were standing right next to each other. But then we had to completely change our production practices after the COVID. We had all of our production meetings over Zoom, and we did all of our file sharing over Telegram groups and files. So we basically made our entire lab virtual at this point. And for our very early experiments, people would just see each other as avatars, as simple blocks, just to get things going and test the internet and the connectivity and the latency before we even started avatar design. Now, the avatar design itself, we made it a goal for our research that our avatars were completely procedural. There's no canned animation or animation cycles. Everything was first prototyped in Java, so we had to go back and make a new sketch. So this, instead of being a sketch on a whiteboard, is a sketch on paper of what our inspiration was for our new avatars. And we tried to match the look of this sketch, but then we iterated as we went along, and we ended up actually simplifying it quite a bit. Now, before we go to any further, one thing to understand is when you talk about avatars, you're talking about, you have something like an Oculus Quest, and you can track people's head position, and you can also track their hands. When we started this, you needed controllers, but then it moved to hand tracking. But we didn't assume that people had an Oculus Quest. We had to assume that they could have whatever headset they had at home. So it could be a Vive, it could be it had to be a Siggraph headset, or the thing was pointless. It could be a Pixel. It could be any one of the offerings from Oculus. And so we that means that we knew the position and orientation of their head and the position and orientation of their two hands, and our job was to fill in a body. So when you're looking at this, and here is our very, very first in-computer sketch. We used colors that were inspired by refrigerator colors from the early 60s. So this is all of that sort of very nostalgic, futuristic, retro future feel. If somebody were designing robot avatars in 1962, what might they come up with? And when we actually get to work on animating these things, the head and the hands are what we know, the rest we have to fill out. And since we don't know anything about the rest of the body, we just created the fiction that they're all on these rocket thrusters, so we don't have to worry about the lower half of the body. Then we did some very simple tests where here you're seeing a simulation using my noise function of head and hand positions. And then from that, we used various procedural animation techniques to then say, okay, hey, let's then make plausible decisions about shoulders, arms, torso, everything else. So only actual incoming data is from head and hands. And now we're also varying the body types. So we can have some avatars have long, skinny heads, some be fat, be whatever. And here you're seeing not only are they varying their movement, but we can have all different types of avatars. And then this you can see behind the scenes what's going on with the avatar design. These are all these things that we can change. And this is the data that's coming in is, again, only from the head and the hands. And then we are inferring everything else. But now we can change any aspect. And it builds a procedural body in real time that does all the inverse kinematics and body language, et cetera, based on the head and the hands. And here we can randomly pick bots so that people can choose and customize their own bot, or they could pick from a random population. So the idea is that all of us are the same species of robot, but different individuals within that species. Then we started adding things like grunge so that we could make it look like they had been there for a while if we wanted to make it look like they'd been on this beach for many years, and vary textures. And then finally, this is kind of what the final looked like, except that we ended up in the very final version of simplifying even further. And rather than having 6 people at a table, we made it a more intimate experience. We have 4 people at a table, but we could have many simultaneous tables. So you could have hundreds of people in the experience, but all of them are sitting around a table with 4 people. And then the participant experience is, and this is the final with all the grunge added. The participant experience is very important. We needed to have very, very simple onboarding because we're dealing with people who don't know our software. So the first thing they do is they choose their avatar, and then they find themselves dropped into a group with other people. Actually, since I put this together, it's gone down from 6 to 4. You have to bring your own drink because we're no longer co-located. So you can choose to either have an alcoholic beverage or not, depending upon how you're sheltering at home that particular day. And then we exported everything from this JavaScript web prototype to the Unreal 4 engine. So all of our procedural code moved from JavaScript to C++. And being in Unreal allowed us to do much more sophisticated rendering. So here, this is what it looks like when you have in JavaScript, and this is what it looks like in JavaScript when you can vary all the different procedural object types, and this is what it looks like when you can actually go into Unreal, and we have much more sophisticated lighting and materials. And that allowed us to create a visually richer world because now we're working in a game engine. Participants would simply register. They would just go to this website and they would be able to register for a particular time. So we had people during the conference, and in fact, we still keep it running now, so people can keep running in the Outpost even after Siggraph. And it could, as I said, work on Rift, Vive, Quests, as long as you have the link, Windows Mixed Reality, or the Valve Index. So first you customize your bot, you drop into an empty seat, and you're either there with your friends or you're there with somebody you want to meet at Siggraph. Now, there are a lot of opportunities for research. we're a research lab, so a lot of the things we do are asking questions about what will work in the future of human interaction. So one of the things we can do is behind the scenes give different people different experiences. Maybe I'm experiencing things with a different scale, or I'm experiencing things with different sound design than you are, or our bots are different, and we can see using pre and post surveys how well people respond to different variations in the experience. So we don't have to tell people they're having different experiences, but we can use that as a variability in our research. Now, moving forward, where do we want to go with this? Well, ultimately, where we'd like to go is we'd like to go to what we think is the eventual blended future, where you can have some people who are physically around a table and some people who are virtually around a table somewhere else. And it can sort of be this idea of Jedi Council from Star Wars, where it doesn't really matter if you are physically in the same place or you are somewhere else. You should still have that sense of intimacy of being face-to-face in person. And one of the reasons we actually went with very abstract avatars, such as robots, is we didn't want to cross the uncanny valley into things that looked almost human. We feel that when people see a robot avatar, they understand they're dealing with an abstracted representation of another person, and there's no problem. And then ultimately, our ultimate goal in the coming years is to scale this up so that people who feel like they're in the same room could actually stand up off of that table, walk around the room, and encounter other people who feel like they're in the same room, freely walking, even though they're actually in a completely different place, and maintain that sense of intimacy and connection and shared audio and physicality that we're striving for in the Outpost. So that is really all I need to say. And I think at this point, I could open up for questions. Thank you.
Great, Ken. Thanks. Excellent talk. And so now we move on to the Q&A. So the audience can start posting questions in YouTube. I will ask a first question that's actually not related to your talk, but related to your Siggraph experience. So I'll ask you, what was your Siggraph experience overall? I mean, what other activities you participate at Siggraph, and how do you feel, this, your work, and this experience of the Outpost fits into the big picture of Siggraph?
The big picture of Siggraph. Well, I mean, I've been going to Siggraph for many, many years. So for me, Siggraph is a very, very personal experiences. So I would have to say that for someone starting out at the conference as like a student, as well as someone like you and me who've been going since, I think, before electricity, the most powerful and rich thing about Siggraph probably is the people you run into. If you're just starting out at Siggraph, when I was just a kid starting out at Siggraph and everything was just beginning, and I would run into and meet people like, Ed Catmull and Jim Blinn, and they would take an interest in, young researchers. And I think that is a tradition at Siggraph, is that people who are old timers actually spend the time to talk to students and mentor them as needed. And those connections couldn't really happen this year. So I would say that was the biggest thing that was missing, was that sense of happy accidents. That is really the unique thing about Siggraph, because it's a very, very friendly community where people were mentored well when they started, and then therefore when they become successful, they mentor the next young people, and Siggraph is really the place where those connections happen. The technical talks were excellent. I found the most interesting things by far to be the panels or anything that happened live. There's a sense when you're seeing a conference where everything's recorded and many things are happening, that you sort of are not strongly encouraged to go see things that are just pre-recorded. But you want to catch the live events, particularly if they're not recorded. I think the history of NYIT, which was just the most amazing thing, was not recorded. So those people who missed it just missed it. And that was with all these old timers, Alvin A. Smith and Ed Catmull and and other greats. That was. I think that in the future, if they have to do this again, they should definitely record the panels. That's the best part of a conference online. So, what can I say? We did the best we could. I thought they did the best they could on short notice, but we're all hoping it'll be able to be in person next summer.
Yeah. Well, encourage the audience to make questions. I still don't have any other question, but follow up on my question about how was the reaction from your work, the Outpost? How people reacted? Did you during the Siggraph made already this evaluation of how people experience the Outpost, and how was the mechanics of things? Tell us more details about that.
Yeah, I thought the Outpost itself worked. Those people who tried it really enjoyed it. I think that it's a beginning. I don't think that Siggraph was organized in a way that made it easy for people to find it, unfortunately. So we didn't get the same numbers that we had gotten in previous years, where we could use all the tricks of word of mouth, of in-person, of people saying, what's cool at Siggraph, go to that booth. I think that's something that people are just learning. But it's continuing to run. So I think our research about gathering people's experience is going to be ongoing, even after Siggraph. One of the things that is an intriguing thing about the online conference is that the online conference doesn't end when the conference ends. Siggraph is still going on. People can still look at the talks and still join in some various discussions. So it stops being just these 4 days, and it starts becoming some kind of weird time blur. And in fact, it could be that the very definition of conferences may actually change fundamentally to be something that's much more diffuse and longer running.
Yeah. There's one question now, but I'm going to just do a little follow up, because you mentioned that you had like two experience in the Q&A sessions for contribution. So, and said one was good, the other was bad. Can you elaborate more on that? Because actually I mentioned this in the last webinar, saying that you had a post on your blog that say,
what I never changed,
right? I
said, well, it turned out that when I participated in 2 panels, and what we learned was that you have to have the moderator very, very strongly needs to keep things on track. And in one of the panels, the moderator did a great job of keeping things on track. And the other panel, I think the moderator didn't realize that some people kind of just like talking. And so if you're not careful, people will just describe their work. And these panels are only half an hour long, and you run out the possibility of having an interaction between panelists. So I think a really good moderator is forcing the panelists to interact with each other, saying, here's a question, what do you think, what do you think, what do you think? And a moderator who doesn't have this iron will could actually get trapped by people just saying, oh, let me just talk about my work for 5 minutes, and 5 minutes, you're done, and the time is out. So one of the panels, the moderator, I think, wasn't able to do that as well. And one of the other panelists, I think, did a great job of that. So you see in online forums, this is where there's no audience feedback that's giving you the sense, the feeling of the crowd. It becomes very important that they understand the rhythm of these things.
Yeah, and I imagine this is one of the limitations of doing things online, because you don't have that sense of presence and some clues like body language and things that people know what's going on, and they take a hint of how to do it, right? So the moderator has to fulfill all these other senses for everybody, right?
I know it's weird because in a Zoom meeting you're not making eye contact with anybody.
Yes.
But right
Yes.
now I'm making eye contact with all of you. It's crazy. It's a whole different thing. I don't know. We're figuring it out.
Yeah. So I'll put like this first question from Danielle.
Okay.
Can you read it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you think that after the pandemic we'll see the adoption of more VR systems than before? Absolutely. I think what's happening now is that we're seeing that people are understanding for the first time what really does work remotely and what doesn't, because they have to. They have no choice. We're being forced to say, okay, now I'm meeting with people online. And I notice that sometimes I will choose to just be on an old-fashioned phone call because it's actually nicer to just hear someone's voice. We're learning things. As I mentioned before, Zoom meetings do not, at this point, have any reasonable way of establishing eye contact for multiple people, and that's very confusing. So I think that VR is going to develop, just as in the early days of cinema, people thought that cinema was supposed to be a variety of theater, and then what they learned is cinema is not theater, and theater is not cinema, and a movie and a play are good in different and disparate ways. Each is better than the other. So I think what we're going to find with VR is good for things we haven't even thought of yet. Just as when the web first came out, the idea was it was just going to be for sharing documents online. And then there are all these other uses for the web that people hadn't thought of. When the smartphone first came out, people thought it was just going to be for very simple uses. And of course, people didn't even think of Uber and car sharing services and other things that came out of the ecosystem of having it. So I think VR will start out with people thinking they're used for one thing, but then other uses will show up that we haven't even thought of yet. And then those will become the main uses. And you'll start getting these powerful vertical entities that are the equivalents of Google and Facebook for societal uses we haven't thought of yet. And I think that's the most interesting thing about what will happen with VR after the pandemic, the realization that we can do things.
Yeah, I totally agree. There are two comments about this. One is that actually I do this. I mean, sometimes I just use my phone, actually on the speaker phone because it's more convenient. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I use, like a streaming, Google Meet, Zoom. Sometimes I use VR. And actually, I think we are all learning, right? Including Siggraph. I mean, actually, Siggraph kind of is very conscious that they are learning how to do conferences in the future, right? And this experience this year is going to change that. But since the pandemic started, I participate in many conferences. I guess you did the same. And some of them, they are totally in VR, like the Vive conference. Actually, was the first conference I participated. The conference was in China, and I entered in VR. And the first talk was about the pandemic. For me, it was like a thrilling experience. And then I participate in other IEEE VR and others that parts were VR and others, mm-hmm. The traditional means, and a mix of all things. But my impression that they are all lacking, the VR technology, it's still not adapted to, this massive things and, research people from us, you and our lab, your lab and our lab are kind of, in the leading edge of helping this, to happen in the different ways, because we are trying different things and, being, bold in our statements, right? And so, but we need to make this very simple, like you mentioned, not relying on, controlled things, people don't have to use Quest, they can use a plethora of things. So mm-hmm. I think there are a lot to learn, and then when the this first wave passes and we get the second wave, we are already in a different stage, right? So I'm going to mm-hmm. move to another question from Alison. He's asking
I
about
think that
hardware.
the hardware will evolve in stages. I mean, what happens is hardware evolves, and then people understand what they need, and then hardware evolves further, and then people understand what they need, and hardware evolves further, and there's a sort of zigzaggy journey, and then hardware that is in the lab is accessible by very few people, and then for some reason, for various market reasons, things get out of the lab, and you get millions of some item, and then you understand more. So it's a very weird process. And I think if we look at the past, we look at, radio evolved into television, evolved, and then broadcast TV evolved into subscription TV. And, nobody really understood what these kinds of media were capable of at the beginning. They just tried something, and then something started working, and then something else started working. They discovered, like, oh, there's the variety show, or there is the interview, or there is news, and genres show up. And I think it's the same thing. Blogs showed up at some point after the web showed up. People, when Tim Berners-Lee and his colleagues were coming up with the ideas for the web, they weren't thinking about blogs. But societal needs start matching these technologies, and then the technologies evolve. Software evolved to support those. The distribution possibility of YouTube created all of these tools for 16-year-olds or even 12-year-olds to make their own videos. Those didn't exist until there was a distribution channel. So I think what's going to happen eventually is that something like this is going to end up gradually turning into that's the quest, is going to gradually look like something that looks like a pair of glasses. And that is going to, probably over the course of the next 5 years, in stages, things will start looking like glasses. And now the glasses will not be doing the computation. The glasses will be talking to something else. Maybe, they'll be talking to your smartphone, which will be talking to the cloud, and there'll be all these different parts of it. But your experience will be, you're walking around and with your hands being tracked freely in your body and everything. So I think that as we move in that direction, the number of people who say, this is useful for my life, will gradually expand. And as the number of people who this is useful for my life gradually expands, then that will in turn drive commodity hardware, and the whole thing will turn into the virtuous cycle that we sort of see. So eventually, say, with smartphones, where just, okay, everybody now that seems to have a smartphone, or at least a large, many, many, many hundreds of millions of people seem to have smartphones, which is different, say, from the high-end equipment in Luis's lab or my lab, where almost nobody has it, and that's an earlier stage. But you use the high-end equipment to prototype potential uses of the commodity hardware to come in the future. So everything is part of that pipeline.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, I think, the other thing that's going to happen is that, there'll be standards. So that like when people organize a big conference like Siggraph, they can rely on some standards for things to happen smoothly, right? But in parallel, there'll be always experimentation. That will be like a few people that, if you take the, tradition of Siggraph, that will be in the conference also, right? So, it's a mix of things, right?
Yeah.
Totally agree with you. So I'm going to put a question from Vinicius, a more technical thing.
I completely agree. Everything that we do is actually about, okay, so I should back up and say, when I'm on a Zoom call with my colleagues, I can see their faces, and we can talk to each other, but it feels like they are there. They're somewhere else. I'm making a video call to someone who's way in another place, and we get off the call. It's like, oh, we had a video call. All right, whatever. Sometimes we put funny backgrounds, but it's not really visceral. When we're in the Outpost, my colleague Mike or Chris or whoever looks like a robot, but I'm hearing their voice. And their voice is coming from the right place, and the resonance is right. And we're in this weird alien world, but we're in it together. And I am together with them. I am physically together with them. And I feel like while this is going on, we are in the same room. That is the context in which one wants to do things that involve interacting with physical objects, whether they're real physical objects or they're virtual objects. So, for example, one of the things we're really interested in is taking this idea of the small group and applying it to education. Because when you have a small group, like not a lecture, but a small breakout group of, a teacher and 3 students, or just a small study group of students, and we say, let's put together this molecule, or let's build some architecture, or let's understand this business model, or let's see how a cell works, or let's play around with the physics of a total eclipse or a nova. Hand-eye coordination, me handing you an object, me looking at you, me realizing that you're looking at this object and someone else is talking. There are parts of our brain that just start working, that work when we're physically in the presence of other people. And that really is the superpower that we find we're already getting, even in this early stage of the Outpost. So yes, absolutely, objects and who and all the technical things to support that. Who has control of the object? If I push an object, can you undo what I did? There are all these questions about editing things that nobody's really looked at very seriously yet, because this is also new, that are going to replace our current ideas of the GUI. I think I'm a big fan of Bruce Brannett and his 2007 film World Builder, which you can see on YouTube. And maybe I'll find a link and drop it into the chat or something, or get it to Luis, because he says we're in a virtual world. It's a fiction. It's a science fiction fantasy. But in a virtual world, we can manipulate objects any way we want. And the way he shows you do it actually is a lot more convincing to me than anything that I've seen so far at WIST or SIGGRAPH.
Yeah, if you send me the link, I'll put on the YouTube page and people can access that. But actually, I'd like to add up something about our experience that, I reminds me of our experiment that when we created the Tempest, we enacted the Shakespeare play, The Tempest. And that was with, actually, we used, Hologram and the collaboration with your lab. And one thing that was striking is that we worked with like a traditional, theater, professionals, like actresses, actors, directors, light designers, and particularly the actors, all of them, they had like very, limited experience with VR. Like the leading actors, she had never, put like a VR, headset, right? So when she went to our lab and put for the first time, for her was like a discovery, right? But during that time, she had like a, kind of a mixed feelings, because she liked it, but then was strange. But what's funny, because something that you mentioned happened and was really clear, because in the beginning they used to rehearse in person, and then they put the VR equipment and do the rehearsal in VR. And there was a point that they stopped doing that. And after we had the documentation and the testimony of these actors, she was saying, well, for me, I cannot do the rehearsal with the real person because I'm so used to the avatar. Because the avatar for me is the real, thing, like it's not the virtual thing. And I cannot relate it to the person just reading the text or just in person, right? I have to be in VR to do the whole thing. And although she had like a, no experience before, she was totally, drawn into, this experience. It was very effective. So, I think what you said is really true, like we experienced this, and you are also like a, seeing that this is the way to go. Right? So, I'm going to put a question by Diego.
Okay. Do you think immersive experiences tend to bring social interactions more in line with what happens in the real world, or do people interact with each other in ways that would be very weird offline? Yes. Well, because they're both true. I think that, well, actually, what I find when we're in the Outpost and the immersive, this is where somebody is looking, and the proper spatial audio, just those things are so important for this. Basically, what we found right from the beginning is that when you have the correct audio and people know where each other is physically in their physical space and where people are looking, you're basically talking to your friend who you know, but they're wearing a digital costume. So it's them. And the audio and quality is incredibly important for this, but it's them wearing a digital costume. So if you go to a costume party and somebody wears some costume, a mask, it's still them. And you know it's them because their personality is them, their movement's them, it's them. And they're in the same physical space with you. So I think that much more than Zoom, embodied VR with proper 3D immersive spatial cues is a much, much better representation of physically being with somebody. And so we tend to act more like us because we feel we're in the same room with them. We're just wearing weird costumes. It's only true if the latency is low enough, if the frame rate is high enough, if the spatial location is steady and accurate, and if the spatial audio is accurate and matches the room and is high enough fidelity. If those things are off, it's like having a terrible phone connection. You know, you can't really communicate. But whether they would do things that were weird, I don't know. We had lots of little cool things to play with in Outpost, like little blocks we could play with. I spent a lot of time playing with the blocks, but didn't seem weird because everybody liked playing with the blocks. So it's the room we were in. So it's context.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. So there's another question by Kyle, following on Diego's question.
Okay, how do you think this new experience will affect our real-world interactions, like the internet and smartphones have changed? One of the problems with the smartphone is that you're in a physical space with people, but then you're not there with them. I think that's an unresolved tension when someone's sitting at a dinner and they're just looking at their smartphone, but they're right there and they're in this experience where you're supposed to be sharing food and drink with them, but they're not psychologically there. That's never been a resolved problem. I mean, that's you see people having fights over it. You see relationships break up because why are you always on your phone? And of course, when you're on your phone, you're hanging out socially with somebody. You're just not hanging out with the people you're physically with. So in some sense, I would argue that choosing to put on a completely immersive experience and be there is actually a psychological cue that's very, very complete. It's like, I'm not here. I'm wherever this shared space is. So it's possible that there might be social practices that we'll adopt. I don't think it will ever work for me to be wearing my VR headset and eating at the dinner table with a family. I think that's not something that, it's good that that's not what's going to happen. So it won't be like the 15-year-old with looking at their smartphone and not hearing you when you say pass the potatoes. I don't think we'll be having those problems.
Yeah, just to add up, I recall one trip I made to China. I was in Beijing in a restaurant, a big restaurant, and I noticed that almost every table, everybody, every single person had like a smartphone. They were looking at the smartphone, and some people were communicating through the smartphone instead of directly, across the table. And that was really funny because our group was the only one that was not doing that, right? So, and I think this thing is going to, I don't know where this kind of thing is going to lead, but something to, well, I think people that develop applications kind of influence how people use all this technology. So in a way, this is a part of our responsibility and people that are actually, taking our research and putting to the market, right?
I do think we should make, and I do think we should make a distinction here between VR and AR. If I'm wearing a pair of AR glasses, say some years from now, and you and I can be having a private chat over the dinner table and no one knows that we're having a private chat. Like those glasses that you're wearing right now, Louise, which look like the same as the glasses you've worn for decades. But in the future, you could actually be seeing someone's texting you and saying, wow, the boss is still talking. What an idiot. And you could be seeing that and the boss has no idea. And it's harder to do that with the phone. But so I think AR could actually go into a very strange direction of people being socially fragmented in a way that maybe other people know, maybe other people don't know. VR is sort of goes the opposite and says, I am not physically here, I am physically there. Yeah,
it's funny because these are the kinds of things that we discussed at that workshop that we organized at the CAI 2 years ago, remember? We had all these issues being discussed by that group of people, wonderful group of people, right? And I won't forget that guy that's from China that he couldn't get the visa to enter, Canada, and there was a robot, with his face running around, and he participated as a robot from China, right? So it was kind of a really strange period.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember that. That was very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any other questions? Because if the audience, is happy with what we discussed already, we could, close the seminar now. Actually, Ken has an appointment soon, and for him it would be good to finish earlier, but
no, but if you people have questions, I'm certainly open to answering your questions, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. One more question. Yes or no? You have to be quick. All right. So with that, I would like really to give my great thanks to Ken as a long time friend and collaborator, wonderful person, very talented. I actually didn't introduce Ken properly because as a person who doesn't need any introduction. The only thing I have to say about Ken to, finish this seminar is that it's someone that certainly knows how to make noise. Right.
No one's ever made that joke before. I think that's the first time. I've never heard that.
Yeah. It's not the first time that I say that, right? But so Ken, thanks a lot, and we'll be seeing each other. As I used to say, in this time of pandemic, you are so distant but so close. So far away and so close, and that's the important, because to be close is like in your mind, right?
Ok, muito obrigado. Muito obrigado. Até logo. Ciao.
Okay, ciao. I'm going to finish the broadcast. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.